I like to stress to people that accessibility is the right thing to do to be good humans. We're trying to include everyone, including people with disabilities, but it also makes business sense for site owners and for agencies too. If you're helping your clients with accessibility, it can be a great opportunity for your agency to grow revenue while you help clients with improvements they need to make on their sites, and it makes the internet better for people with disabilities. It's a win-win-win all around.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another A2 Hosting Show webinar. Today we've got a return guest expert in Bette Hannon and coming back to talk about accessibility for agencies. This is one you're going to be wanting to take notes and make sure you do. It's the 5 essential keys you need to know about accessibility for agencies. So I'm glad you're here. Super thrilled to have you, and you're with a great expert in Bette Hannon. Along the way up, before I turn that over to her, the chat is open, but also if you have a question for Bette and we have time at the end of the presentation, we'll share a couple of questions that you might have. So I'll be monitoring that during Bette's presentation. But Bette, thanks so much for being here today and sharing on this subject. You are the expert. You run both an agency and accessibility, and I'm excited to have you, and thank you for being on the A2 webinar show today.
Oh, thanks, Corey. It's good to be here. It's good to be here. I do truly, believe that accessibility it is just so important to make sure that we're not excluding users with disabilities, preventing them from, accessing the web. But also, I just as much believe that accessibility can be an opportunity for agencies to take on some revenue generating work that A, their clients really need, but B, that makes the web a better place for people with disabilities. So I'm excited to be here and share some things with you today. So here's a roadmap of where we're going to go. Oops, got to get clicked into the right thing. Here's a roadmap of where we're going to go today. Usually we have at least one person on a webinar that is new to accessibility. So we'll do a quick overview of what accessibility is. I think as you're talking with clients, it's really important to understand the legal landscapes, both here in the US and the EU, so that you can help clients understand their obligations, their legal obligations. So we'll do a quick review of that. And then I'll outline 5 accessibility issues that you, with very little fairly little in terms of accessibility knowledge, can get started on today working on with your clients. And then we'll talk about some resources and benefits for accessibility that can be used as selling points or as you're talking with clients for helping them understand accessibility. And I'm hoping we'll have some time left over also for Q&A. So let's dive in. We want to make sure everybody's on the same page. The first step for understanding accessibility is to realize that not everybody uses websites in exactly the same way. So not only are people on different devices with different screen sizes or in different lighting environments, some people are not able to use a mouse with their hand. Some people are unable to see the screen at all, or they need to magnify the screen display by 200 or 300x, 2 or 3x, right? People may not be able to match images or do math for your captions. So all of those things are related to accessibility. Accessibility is making sure that the sites we put up are structured and have been implemented in ways that allow users with disabilities to utilize them, to access them, to consume that content. So this includes things like making sure our images have alternative text descriptions. Sometimes we say alt text on them, that when a user needs a screen reader, so many blind users, for example, use a screen reader tool, it reads out loud to them that description of the image. Both screen reader users and people with mobility impairments may depend on keyboard navigation instead of using a mouse. So accessibility includes making sure that all the functionalities of a site can be navigated by using only the keyboard, primarily the tab and the enter keys. So we can start to think about many different types of disabilities, almost personas of people with disabilities that we might want to take into consideration as we're putting together websites, making them more accessible. For any visually impaired attendees today, I'm going to read out, I have a list here, I'm going to read out them, but I'm not going to belabor this a long time. If you have questions about any of these disabilities and how they impact website interactions, be sure and ask me in the QA. But we'll want to plan for users that include people who are blind, but also people with low vision. People who are colorblind, that's 9% of all men. Um, we want to make sure we're including age-related vision disabilities, and that's not including not just trouble seeing smaller print, but also color perception changes as the lens of our eye gradually yellows with age. Mobility issues is not is includes not just can't use a mouse, but also may not have dexterity or steadiness to tap or click in small buttons or targets. People with reading disabilities, people who have seizure disorders that may be triggered by flashing or strobing, cognitive disabilities, sensory or focus issues, ADHD, anxiety and depression. It's not an exhaustive list here, but I'm just trying to get you to realize that disabilities impact website usage and they can be quite varied. And also to realize that there's not these are not binary things, right? We sometimes think either people are blind or they're not blind, and that's a binary. But really, there's a lot of whole spectrum in between that of vision, and that's true for almost all these disabilities. That they can have vary quite a bit in their severity or impact from person to person, and also a person can have more than one disability that may impact their web usage. Sometimes people think the number of people with disabilities is a fairly small number, but all over the world, including the CDC in the United States, the estimate is 20 to 25% of all adults have some disability that requires an accommodation. And remember, a lot of these disabilities are invisible, things like color blindness or seizure disorders. So you probably know a lot of people with disabilities that you just don't know have a disability. And so it's not a tiny number of people that we talk about affecting with web accessibility. It's quite a few. Remember that increases as we age, and the average age of population in most developing nations is going up. And so if you have a website with a demographic that is people over 50, you should absolutely be taking accessibility into consideration. And of course, all of us are really just one accident or illness away from a disability and needing web accessibility. If you or your clients need a monetary motivator for web accessibility, in the US, people with disabilities are estimated to represent more than $490 billion in disposable income. Globally, that is $8 trillion. So if your websites are not accessible, you are almost certainly leaving money on the table for more accessible competitors. So the place to go for the fullest information on implementing web accessibility is the WCAG, the Website Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is where you're going to find that specific information about the technical pieces to address for accessibility. There are 3 levels: single A, double A, triple A. Double A is almost all the most common focus, and that's really what is legally required in most places. So let's look at that legal landscape as an important context for talking about accessibility. We're going to talk about laws and legal matters, but I should stress that I'm not an attorney. If you have questions about your own liability as an agency or a developer, you should contact your own attorney. Clients should contact their own attorneys. Do be aware, though, that lots of general business attorneys don't really have much experience with accessibility law or these accessibility requirements. And so you want to kind of figure out just who you need to talk to figure out your own liability. So in the US, web accessibility tends to be driven mostly by lawsuits that are filed under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. These cases have been rising year over year, although last year there was actually a dip in the number. Although more of those cases are now going to state courts under state accessibility laws. Now, those state laws have a whole variety of requirements, and those state laws can change a lot more rapidly. And so that's not necessarily a great development in terms of trying to help our clients, right? Because it's hard to keep track of where everything is changing. And remember, that's not the state where the business is located, the website owner is located as a business, but the state wherever that the plaintiff chooses to file. So you'll have to comply with, 50 states or more, territories, their different accessibility laws. Now, these are only the numbers of cases that actually make it to court last year. We estimate that 3 to 4 times as many are settled before they get to court. It's actually much more common for people to settle the lawsuit before it goes to court. Many of these lawsuits are filed by what we call serial plaintiffs. That is one person with a disability, typically someone who's blind, but occasionally someone who's deaf, who partner together with one attorney and they file dozens of lawsuits over websites, largely using cookie cutter kind of documented lawsuit documents. They're hoping for a financial settlement because ADA doesn't give monetary damages. They really don't want it to go to a judgment for over ADA. They want to settle at some point. Now that can feel really scammy, but it doesn't make them any less real lawsuits that need to be addressed. So almost always in these cases, whether they're settled or a court verdict, the site owner must make the website conform to WCAG 2.1 AA, and they're generally given a 12 or more increasingly a 24-month window to get that conformance in place. Here are a few quick stats about these U.S. lawsuits. More than 75% of these lawsuits involve e-commerce websites. And if you stop to think about it, it kind of makes sense. There's, the user comes to the site, they have an intentionality of doing something on the site, not just consuming content, but implementing purchases. There's a lot more user interaction on those sites. So we can extend that to sites that have a lot of user interaction are probably more vulnerable. 41% of those sites last year that went to court were being sued for a second or more times. So it's not uncommon for someone to get sued multiple times. We've even had a client sued as they were implementing the remediations from the last lawsuit. 25% of those lawsuits last year included a site that was already running an accessibility overlay widget. We're going to talk about those a little bit later. A single lawsuit might end up costing the site owner $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees and settlement costs. And then on top of that, would still need to make the website accessible. And the cost for that, of course, can vary quite widely depending on how bad the accessibility is to begin with. But it's almost certainly going to cost more because now you have to reach full conformance with WCAG in a tight timeline. So that generally costs more to do. It's not only lawsuits that are driving accessibility initiatives in the U.S. in 2024, in 2023. Yeah, 2024. Oh my gosh, I got to keep remembering it's 2025 now. 2024, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a new rule that requires all government or public sector websites to meet WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines by April 2026. This includes things like city or state government websites, but also things like fire departments or public libraries, basically any organization that gets the majority of their funding from some level of government, all kinds of government agencies that might have sites. So you do get a reprieve if the entity is for a population area of less than 50,000 in the 2020 census. So if it's a small city, for example, they get an extra year before the compliance deadline. But another rule that actually may have a lot more impact for small and medium-sized sites is that the Department of Health and Human Services in the U.S. also announced last year that any entity that is receiving Medicare or Medicaid reimbursement payments, so for instance, almost every physician practice, hospitals, surgery centers, some dentists and oral surgery centers, they also must meet that April 2026 deadline for meeting WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines. Now, it's the European Accessibility Act that's actually going to bring some really far-reaching changes for web accessibility all over the world. And here's a quick overview. Well, like in most other nations, this law is based in human rights laws, and the aim is really to make sure everyone has equal digital access. It's really an acknowledgement of how much of our lives anymore involves some kind of digital access, buying things online or paying bills or paying our taxes. Enforcement will go into effect June 28, 2025. So that's this June. The law was actually first passed in 2019, and we've been given this long window to get ready. Now we're down to just over 5 months. It can take 6 to 9 months, though, at a moderate pace. So if you have clients that are need to comply, you should be getting that going, pretty quickly. Like GDPR, this law will apply based on where your customers live. So you might be a US based or Canadian based business, but still need to comply with this law. Every country will have their own enforcement inside the EU will have their own enforcement agency that will both receive complaints, but many of them will also proactively look for non-compliance. And there are fines and penalties that are a part of this enforcement system. There is an exclusion for or exemption for micro enterprises. So if a business has less than 2 million euros in annual revenue, or about $2 million, let's say, or they have less than 10 employees, they're exempted for the time being. But, I think if you have clients that are, just eking out with this exemption, I think as they come up for a redesign or a redevelopment project, it's a smart idea to include accessibility as a part of that, because we are pretty certain that threshold for the exemption will be coming down over time. And of course, you hope that the business is growing and they will grow to kind of outgrow that exemption. There are lots of other requirements in the EAA that you may need to learn about. And here are some that are the most relevant for people who are creating and managing websites. So websites, but especially e-commerce, payment websites, anything that gives product and services info, anything that's got a client login must meet WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines. Products and services that have any kind of digital communications aspects. So, for example, a companion app or a dashboard. Here's looking at you, hosting companies, must be accessible, and information about that accessibility must be provided on the website pre-purchase. Any documents like user manuals that are PDFs, for example, must be accessible. And know that PDFs have their own kind of specialization within accessibility. There are special things that have to be done to PDFs to make them accessible, as well as kind of the general HTML accessibility guidelines. And for a number of the nations, you'll have to have an accessibility statement on the website that includes links to recent. We think this means at least annually, but it's not clear yet. And some of them are requiring independent testing by an experienced accessibility professional. And some people are saying that means a credentialed accessibility professional. There are only about 3,500 of those in the world. And you need to tell users how they can report an issue. Here's some of the highlights from the national laws. Of course, they're all different, as many of the, all the countries in the EU are really different. Many of the financial penalties start at around $60,000 per instance, although a couple start at 100,000 euros per instance. If you fail to meet an adjudicated compliance deadline, so there's been a complaint. As a part of that complaint, there was an agreement that you would make everything accessible by a deadline, and you miss that deadline, the fines for that can be 1,000 euros per day. Some fines can be based on a percentage of your global revenue. So most notably Italy, where the fines can be as much as 5% of the previous year's gross global annual revenue. Global annual revenue. In Ireland, you can receive up to 18 months of jail time. Now, to get jail time, you have to either lie or refuse to, make your site accessible, or your assets accessible. And I really don't think anybody's going to get extradited, but this gives you a sense for how seriously some countries are taking this. Some countries are requiring WCAG 2.2 AA, notably Germany. That's stricter than the EAA, the European Accessibility Act sets the lowest threshold, and it requires 2.1. There's really not that much more that you need to do for 2.2. We're advising all of our clients to go for, make their goal 2.2, because we know that threshold, that requirement will be raised at some point in the near future. I would say the next couple of years. Countries can revoke your right to sell in their country. And while most nations do allow for individual users and some advocacy groups for both consumers and people with disabilities to report violations, Germany allows for your competitors to file a complaint against you. And their rationale for this is that it levels the playing field because it's not fair if one company, invests in accessibility and follows the law and another company profits by avoiding the law. So, given all these legal landscapes, what is it that you can do as agency owners to help your clients build a legal defense? Now, remember, I'm not an attorney, but here's my opinion. I told Corey earlier, I'm getting a little more opinionated in 2025. If we recognize that no website is ever 100% accessible for all people with disabilities, it's just not legally rationally possible. It's not practically possible. Then we also recognize that anytime the code or content is changed on a website, new accessibility issues can be created. Then what we are left with is that the site owner is making a good faith effort over time to address accessibility. That's the defense. There are a few documented U.S. court cases where having an existing program of accessibility improvement gave the owner a leverage and benefit in the court case and the settlement. And there are also cases where having an ongoing commitment to a similar program after a lawsuit was part of the settlement stipulations. Nobody can ever promise you that a website will never be sued. I mean, we're just a litigious country in America. Nobody can promise that, honestly. But if you imagine that you have a stack of monthly reports in hand to give to the attorneys showing that you have an ongoing commitment to accessibility, even if that's at a fairly minimal level of progress, that represents a valuable asset to the defense in that case. What that means is that you do not have to make your site conform to WCAG guidelines overnight. You can take a more continuous improvement or a CI/CD strategy with accessibility. Now, don't get me wrong about that. You have to actually do the testing and be making progress on those improvements, but it can happen more gradually over time. Access-to-Cart offers some turnkey plans to implement this type of a program, but you could certainly figure out a way to put this together, something like that on your own. Even the client can implement that in-house. Now, there is a greater weight to the legal defense when you have certified accessibility professionals doing that testing and documentation. But, that's a balance for the client, a risk balance that they need to sort out. The key is that there's documentation in the form of, I would say, monthly reports. Maybe people could go to quarterly if they were feeling, like that was a good solution for them. But you're creating a monthly report that's created and stored somewhere, put away, and that includes new issues that are found and validations that issues have been fixed. So you're just continuously kind of working on finding new issues and fixing things that have been identified. The strategy will not work if the site is already being sued. If there's already a lawsuit, then the best strategy is to work quickly to make it conform as closely as possible to WCAG 2.1 AA as soon as possible. Getting clients to take on proactive, continuous programs like this is a little like getting them to eat their vegetables. And they just tend to resist it. They tend to want to take their chances, cross their fingers, and hope they won't get sued. But as you know, as agency owners, part of the reason you're here at this webinar, accessibility concerns and compliance requirements are continuing to grow. And so at some point, they will almost certainly need to address this. And the earlier they address accessibility, the more cost effective it will be for them in the long run. And building a legal defense with a regular program of testing and remediation is, I think, the way to go. So let's dive into our 5 basic issues that any agency or any developer can help a site with. These issues are not hard to find and they're not hard to fix. They are alt text on images, heading tags properly nested, HTML lists, color contrasts at proper ratios, and link text that's not ambiguous. Now, the thing you want to do if you're starting to work on clients with accessibility is the very first thing is to make sure not only the developers for a site, but also the design team and the content team get trained around creating accessible content and code so that they can stop creating new barriers. There are plenty of webinars and tutorials for training these folks, and there are even people that can be hired to do custom trainings, but stop creating new issues should be the first order of business. So alt text or alternative text is a description of the image for users that cannot see the image, primarily those that are using screen readers. The alt text helps them understand the image content. To write alt text correctly, you want to be descriptive. So, not just explaining the image, but explain its function in the content. For example, instead of the alt text of image of a tree, for the image I've got there on the slide, and by the way, never use the word image in the alt text because the screen reader's already saying that to them. Say instead, an apple tree with red apples. You want to keep your alt text concise, aim for 1 to 2 sentences. You're going to focus on key details, but not too many details, right? There's a balance here between too minimal and too verbose, and you want to keep it and it kind of balanced out. Avoid redundancy. So you don't want to repeat anything that's already provided in the captions or the surrounding content. And this is especially a kind of thing you need to watch when you have product images, right? So a lot of times we find that folks who have an e-commerce shop, they've got the product image, and they are really they're subconscious. They're not intending to, but they're relying on the product image to tell the user or the customer a lot about some of the details of the product, right? And so then they things that they think maybe should go in the description of the product actually or in the alt text actually should go into the product text. So, does the jacket you're selling does it end above the hips or below the hips, right? That's stuff that actually should go in the product description, not in the alt text. And so alt text for product images is kind of a specialty kind of thing you want to think about. Context matters, right? The description should reflect the image's purpose in this particular context. If the context of where this image is located is more factual, then the alt text might be a pink lady apple tree with red ripe apples hanging from its branches. But if the context is more emotional, then the alt text might be a bountiful apple tree, its branches laden with fruit, creating a sense of abundance and harvest. Right? So there's that different reflection of how the image is being used in the context of the page. Never ever use the image file name or keyword stuff in your alt text. As Google is getting better at recognizing images by AI, they're penalizing you for you. It's a terrible user experience for people with disabilities. Good alt text improves user experience for people with disabilities, but it also improves your SEO. Now, if there are a lot of images that are missing alt text, there are some AI tools to help you generate alt text descriptions. Just be very careful. There are, at least currently, a lot of errors. It's very common to have errors in that alt text, especially, AI is not great at recognizing that context yet. So you'll want to have human beings review any AI generated alt text. Semantically nesting heading tags, the H1, the H2, the H3, is crucial for both accessibility and SEO. That these heading tags structure your content, making it easier for screen reader users and search engines to understand the content. So headings should never be used to style content. You can style a heading with any size font you want visually, but just make sure that the sections have their proper level. So here's how to do it correctly. One and only one H1 on the page. This is the title of the page, post, or product. Use H2s for all your major sections. Under that, H3s, and you're going to nest them as you kind of see in that thing on the page. You're going to go like the old, outlines we used to have to do for high school English. I'm that old, but maybe they don't make kids do that anymore. But you'll want to do that. Now, part of the reason for doing this and putting the structure in place is that often a screen reader user might direct their screen reader to read out loud only the H2s on the page until they get to a section that they're interested in, and then they want the H3s under that H2, and so on and so on. And that's what allows the users to find and scan their content. If you don't use proper HTML ordered and unordered lists, but instead you're using dashes or carets or putting in your own numbers, or as I'm increasingly seeing on social media, emoji to create what looks like a list, then screen readers may not be able to properly interpret that content for their users. So use proper HTML, through the little, drop down with bullets or numbers. Make sure they're UL or OL lists. And don't use symbols or emojis as your list markers. This will help people with visual impairments better navigate their way through the content. The caveat is you can use symbols if you have properly coded this out as an HTML list with an icon. That's not going to happen on social media, though, because you don't have access to do that in the HTML. So make sure that you are kind of using these HTML for lists and columns properly. Having good color contrast is just critical for making sure that your website works for everybody. People with visual impairments, people who are colorblind, and those of us over 50. Good color contrast. Also, it really improves usability for all your users when people are in bright sunlight or they're on small screens. For colorblind users, you'll want to avoid relying solely on color to convey meaning. So if you have an error message and it's only text in red, that doesn't help it. You need to have like a symbol there or some other pairing it with some other things to, you want to make sure that color is not the only way that you're conveying that meaning around the error messages, for example. Good color contrast means that text and other elements stand out against their background. There are multiple color contrast checkers on the web and inside of other tools, like in Figma or in Word or Adobe as you're creating things, documents. I like the WebAIM one here shown for, I like its simplicity, right? You put in the hex value for the foreground and the background color, and it'll tell you whether it passes WCAG guidelines. Note that there are different guidelines for small text and large text. So small text, body text, large text headings, usually. In the case of these, and that there are different contrasts required for AA and AAA. Right. So in the case of these two colors that I've got in my screenshot there, if the periwinkle I have there is a pass at AA if the text is large, but not if it's normal body size font. Screen reader users, in addition to asking the reader to read out loud all the H2s and then down into H3s, often have their screen reader read out loud link text on the page. This is a strategy for surfing through content, just like all of us would do visually, or all those who are not visually impaired would do visually. But if a screen reader starts to read out loud all the link texts on a page, and what the user hears is link, click here. Link. Now it's identifying that it's a link to the user, right? So it's automatically adding that. So if the link text is click here, it'll hear link, click here, link, click here. There's absolutely no context for the user. How frustrating that is. Link text, the link that appears on the front of the page that is the part of the hyperlink, that should be able to be read out loud without any other context and never leave the user wondering what clicking that link would do for them. So instead of read more, it should be read more about the incident or read more about the report, sales report. Now, that said, there are programmatic ways that you can add special screen reader text to links so that, for instance, you can keep the read more link or the read more button on a blog archive page, but you can have the screen reader announce instead, read more on, and dynamically insert the post title. So there are ways to do that. There's also a plugin in the repo called the Screen Reader Text Format plugin, which lets you add screen reader text to any link in the block editor. And so this can be super helpful for instance, links that you are styling to look like buttons. Sign up today for our, email newsletter. So here's a recap of our 5 basic issues. Fixing just these types of things will make the site a lot more accessible. 80% of the sites on the web just getting started on alt text, headings, HTML lists, color contrast, link text that's not ambiguous at all. So when you're first starting to address accessibility, this is the best time to use automated tools for finding those issues. Automated tools are only going to find about 30% of accessibility issues. But those 30% of types of issues include 3 of the 5 issues that we've just been talking about: alt text, heading, and color contrast. So one of the tools that I think folks new to accessibility find the easiest to use is the wave.webaim.org tool. Many folks also like the Axe tools in the browser, especially developers like that. But here's a pro tip for selling accessibility. If you go to the Wave tool page, there's a browser extension, by the way, also for Wave. But if you go to the page for the Wave tool and you put in the URL of the website to view the test page, and it'll look just like as there in my screenshot, right? The little gray box on the side with the Wave results on top of the website. But if you do that, you can also grab the URL in the address bar that contains the site domain name, right? It contains the site. And this is really handy because you can copy and paste that into an email to a client to share it with them and get their attention around accessibility. They'll go straight to something where they can see that report. Now, just be sure when you do this that you're helping clients understand that even if they get 0 errors on the Wave tool, it does not mean that there are no accessibility problems on their website. So for instance, these automated tools are great with things like color contrast, but they can't tell you anything about whether there are keyboard navigation issues. It's also important to know with these automated tools that there are always going to be some flagged false positives. So, for instance, if you have a background image, the tool might not be able to see that background image and will often tell you that you have like white font on a white background. But you can look at the front end of the site and verify that that's a false positive. So sometimes it just if folks are taken a little by surprise that there are these false positives that you have to rule out. So if you're just getting started with digital accessibility for a WordPress site, the accessibility checker plugin from Equal as Digital can be also a great place to start. This plugin is free in the plugin repo. The free version adds just a little section at the bottom of every page and post editor, just like you would see for like SEO tools at the bottom, below there. A whole little section with some testing down there for you to get information about the accessibility of that particular page or post. Um, the paid or pro version of the plugin has a lot of nice features, including, so you have to, in the free version, you have to open every page or post for it to do a scan, save and save it again, resave it to get the check. But if you get the pro version, it can kind of bulk scan all your previously published pages, posts, and includes custom post types like products as well. And it includes some really nice features for reporting and for globally ignoring issues that are, if you have an issue in the footer, it's going to appear on every single page or post scan. So you can globally ignore some things like that. You also get access to their office hours. So you can come, they have monthly office hours that you can come and get some help or get some feedback or some consulting, a little bit of time with them to help sort some things out. So great value there. Again, it's important to know that this tool will help you primarily with automated content checking. You're still going to need to check a lot of things manually, but especially if you're working with a really large site or you have multiple content creators to wrangle, this can be an invaluable to the multiple content creators is if you have the pro version, it will tell you which content which website user ignored an accessibility issue. So we found that to be helpful, especially like if a site is somebody is in a hurry and they ignore an issue, it gets published, and now we can track who's doing that. So I've recommended some automated first level testing tools, but there are also some plugins that advertise that they can solve all your accessibility issues by installing one little plugin or a little script. And first of all, you should be really suspicious of anybody that promises to fix all the accessibility issues or prevent you from ever being sued, because no one in honesty can promise those things. No website is ever 100% accessible. So these plugins are really scripts looking for accessibility issues and trying to fix at least some of them on the fly. Um, that's why they're called an overlay plugin. It's important to remember that, again, they're automated, so they're only going to find 30% of issues. They can't fix or change keyboard navigation. Now, they can add a skip to content link, but that may not fix all of your keyboard navigation. That's that's only one part of keyboard navigation. It's really not advised to use these plugins, but if you do use them, do be aware they're not going to solve all your issues, and you'll still need to do some work around accessibility. One use case for them might be if you have a site that has a lot of accessibility issues, it's a very large site, and you have a deadline, you need to buy some time with some of the issues while you're manually fixing other ones. That may be a use case, but just being aware that they're not going to be a big fix. There are a lot of reasons why they're not a great choice, including the fact that they create new issues for people with disabilities in their own. They conflict with existing tools. They may not be privacy compliant. We're seeing increasing evidence, as I mentioned, that the serial lawsuit folks are targeting sites with overlays. It's possible to target the tech stack a site is using, and we're seeing increasing evidence that those sites are being targeted that are using these. I think because they're trying to take advantage of site owners who are putting these tools on there without realizing that they're not going to fix all of their issues. The very best website to learn more about overlay plugins and how they work and why they might not be a great choice is overlayfactsheet.com. And I do like to put in there that the EU Commission, in terms of those EU kind of compliance pieces, has really clearly stated that overlays will not meet compliance without additional manual testing and remediation. We all wish that there were easy buttons for accessibility. We all wish that it were just, flip a switch, but there's not. Sorry. There are some really great WordPress related resources for folks. Two of them are the Facebook group for WordPress accessibility. It has a really long name, WordPress Accessibility Support for Building Disability Friendly Websites. But there are a lot of accessibility experts there who can, bring your questions there. And folks are usually pretty generous with pointing you toward resources or helping you out with questions there. It can be a great resource for you. The other is on meetup.com, the WordPress Accessibility Meetup meets twice per month. It's a completely online meetup, has amazing speakers, but in addition, they have a giant growing library of videos of past presentations. And this makes it a great place to start learning more about accessibility and pick and choose your topics that you want to learn more on for picking up more about accessibility. If you work with small businesses that are under either 30 employees or under $1 million in gross revenue, they may be eligible for a non-refundable tax credit of up to 50% of what they spend, up to $10,000 in expense. So they can get a $5,000 tax credit. But that can apply to a total site redesign when accessibility is the focus of the project, or auditing or testing or remediations, all of that, the regular testing program that we talked about before, all of that can be a tax credit. Originally, this tax credit was created to help brick and mortar store owners get their stores remediated for physical accessibility. But we do know, and we have had clients that have claimed it for website accessibility as well. So these basic website accessibility remediations that we've been talking about, that can largely be done by somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience, the alt text and the link text and all of those kind of things. Even a lot of that can be undertaken as a DIY project by the site owner. But at some point, you'll probably then want, as you're kind of continuing to improve accessibility, you'll probably want to reach out to an accessibility professional for help with manual testing and more complex issues. The thing to know and be aware of is that, just like SEO, anybody can hang out an accessibility shingle. Anybody can claim to be an accessibility expert. And it's, it's unfortunate. And as we are having this growing kind of concern with accessibility and growing concern, growing compliance requirements, I anticipate that this will happen more. Here are some questions to ask. So that you can kind of do some, due diligence about choosing vendors. So ask whether they do manual testing. There are a lot of folks that are really just using that automated testing, and that's all they do. They really don't even know much about how to do manual testing, much less how to fix some things. So ask whether they're doing manual testing. Get a sample of their report. They should be able to give you a sample report. Look at it. Does it explain the issues? Does it give you just a cut and dried link over to the WCAG success criteria, or is it explaining the issue for you and what you need to do to get it fixed? Does it explain to you how to replicate the issue when they were doing the testing? Ask for a reference from other clients. And you can certainly check for certification or at least membership in the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. That's not a requirement. There's certainly a lot of experienced accessibility professionals who don't have the certification or who don't pay out to be a member of this organization. But that can be one of the kind of things that you look for as you're looking at vendors. Now, as you're thinking about getting professional help with accessibility sites, you want to be aware there are a number of ways that can be structured. So you want to think about the particular site that you're working on, and it's kind of how big is it, how complex is it, what are some of the issues that that your team or the client's team and their skill levels, any deadlines that may be at play, and some of these different structures may be a better fit for different situations. So traditionally, folks have audits done. It's more affordable to do some sort of sampling audit with a specific number of pages rather than the whole site. But even this can be a very expensive option. Our cheapest sampling audit is $9,000 for 10 URLs. It's just super detailed testing on those 10 pages, and then you extrapolate from there. Now, audits like this are a snapshot in time, and there's often not a provision for ongoing consulting or retesting, and they can be overwhelming with the number of issues they surface. But sometimes this can be a helpful way to get a large overview of the issues on a particular site, especially large sites, so that you can make a strategic plan. Just know that you're probably going to need to have some retesting, re-auditing done at some point in the future. Done for you remediations is when you hire the accessibility professionals to both identify and implement remediations on the website. Now, this too can be very expensive, but it can also help you get the site quickly remediated. Sometimes when a site's been sued or there's been a complaint or there's a big concern with PR related to accessibility issues, the site owner has to get the site remediated very quickly. And so when time is short, but there's money to pay for it, this may be the best option. Project-based consulting is when the accessibility professional comes alongside an existing web development team, like your agency team or the in-house team, and they consult around the fixes while the agency or in-house team implements the remediations. This is often done because people, sometimes people are a little fussy about who gets in to make changes in their site, right? And then the accessibility team can retest to make sure things are fixed. Our team does a lot of this done with you option. It can take longer to get a site remediated with this, but one of the advantages is that the development team, the in-house team, learns a lot more about accessibility in that process, and they can start applying those skills to other projects going forward. And then one version of a done with you approach is at Accessicart, we offer accessibility maintenance plans. That's really a smaller version of those project-based consulting, where we're identifying a small number of issues each month over a recurring plan with all the support for fixing those to tell you how to fix. Then the in-house team or the agency is implementing the fixings, and then Accessicart is retesting, and then those reports that are coming out that can be a legal defense. It may not be a fast way to get the site. It's not clearly a way to get the website remediated quickly, but it can spread it out over time. And this can be really helpful for folks that are on a budget. And this can be a great upsell for agencies to offer accessibility remediations, in partnership with Accessicart. If you're going to be talking to clients about accessibility, you need to be aware of just the benefits beyond avoiding legal actions so you can help them kind of begin to approach accessibility. So you would never build a brick and mortar store and then create barriers that keep out 25 percent of the potential customers. So you want to, if you're preventing people from engaging with your site, you're losing money. We talked about adding alt text and semantic headings and HTML for lists and structuring the content, and all of that is important for SEO as well as accessibility. Um, when you're making that site accessible, everybody finds the site easier to use. Remember, maybe I'm trying to use your site while I have a wiggly baby, or I'm on my phone in bright sunlight. Everybody has a better user experience. It's usually a lot cheaper to keep current customers than to acquire new ones, and the likelihood of developing a disability increases as we age. So it's an investment in keeping your current customers, especially if this is important to think about it, if you have customer interactions on the website, buying products, paying for invoices, or scheduling things. Making a business site accessible can be an investment in your brand, especially if your brand has, part of your brand values is about being inclusive. You want to not only that's attractive to not only people with disabilities, but it makes a difference to their family members and their friends. Also, think about the flip side of that. Getting publicity because your site is not accessible to people with disabilities can be a PR nightmare. So it's far better to come out on the more inclusive side of this. Finally, here are a couple of ideas for selling accessibility as an agency. So generally speaking, we think about websites have a 3 to 5 year, maybe 6 year shelf life before it starts to look dated. If there are significant theme related issues with accessibility, particularly with menu and skip links and those sorts of things, you may want to, and the website is more than halfway through that shelf life, it probably will be more cost effective for the owner or the site owner to do a site redesign that includes accessibility than to try and remediate the site that has issues. So thinking about bumping the redesign, whether that's a good idea or not just remediating immediately as a kind of knee-jerk reaction. And then, we've been talking about these simple, basic accessibility issues that folks can do. Think about the pain point. Now, a lot of these things the client could do on their own, but it's kind of a huge deal if they've got to add alt text to thousands of images, or fix the semantic headings on hundreds of posts, or making sure the link text is never an issue. But so, you can sell this to clients as a package for, do 3 issues a month, 3 hours a month, or even at 1 hour a month that we're going to do on improving accessibility over time. And then, start with the main level items, start working your way down the most visited pages. Just do that an hour at a time, or 3 hours at a time, or however many hours. And then, as you get through those basic issues, then start bringing in some folks to help you figure out what are the next issues beyond that. So I like to stress to people that accessibility is the right thing to do to be good humans. We're trying to include everyone, including people with disabilities, but it also makes business sense for site owners and for agencies too. If you're helping your clients with accessibility, it can be a great opportunity for your agency to grow revenue while you help clients with improvements they need to make on their sites, and it makes the internet better for people with disabilities. It's a win-win-win all around. I think we have a little bit of time for questions, but I will say, if you would rather have a more confidential chat about selling accessibility in your particular context, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm glad to do that too. I hope this has been helpful for folks.
Fantastic as always. Very practical, helps that they steps to take to start taking into this. It's an essential and unavoidable now part of it. The other side is the ethical side of wanting to make sure all can be get to our websites and things like that. So thank you so much, Beth, for another fantastic webinar.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Corey.
Okay, so a couple of questions real quick. R1 talks about, do you have any resources for creating an accessibility statement for clients' websites?
Oh, yeah, there are, if you Google around, there are some kind of like accessibility statement generators. So you can look at that. Typically, and this is something that you may want to run through an attorney. Like, again, it's kind of like, it's kind of like contracts for your agency. You may, like, a lot of people DIY that, or buy certain, buy a subscription to something. But, I generally think about these accessibility statements as having pretty much three things in the U.S. context. One, a kind of value statement. We want everybody to be included. Two, our goal is WCAG, say 2.1 AA. We're trying for that. And then three, acknowledgement that, keeping a website accessible is a work in progress. So report to us if you have any problems. Now, that's the context of the US. In Europe, part of what's going to happen for some websites in some countries is that they're supposed to actually list out the places where they are not yet accessible and the plans for when that will be made accessible, which we would never do in our US context in terms of our lawsuits, but that's going to be so I don't know how that's going to sort itself out for companies that have both locations, right? So I just get the advice of an attorney to look at that, but there are some others you can, that's what a lot of people do with their contracts, right? For agencies is also copy other people's accessibility statements. The difference with this is they're publicly available on the other people's websites.
Thank you. Matt says, I'm slowly working on manually making changes, but I still have an accessibility plugin or extension. I feel like it has benefits for people like me who have trouble reading small text or have poor contrast issues. Should I remove it from my website? And if you need more context, let me.
I'm gonna need to hang on just a second. I need to turn on. I'm having a little to turn on the captions for you because I lost a little bit of the question. Sorry. So
Okay.
can you just repeat the question real quick?
No worries. Matt says, I'm slowly working on manually making changes, but I still have accessibility plugin or extension. I feel like it has benefits for people like me who has trouble reading small text or contrast issues, but should I remove it from my website? Anna.
Oh, the overlay plugin. Yeah, that's a that has legal things. If it were me,
Yeah, and hey, everybody, let me restate this. Beth has said many, many times she is not legal counsel. She's sharing her experiences that as she's worked in some of her practices, but that's up to you to consult a lawyer. This is not legal advice. All right, Ned.
I think if it were my site, based on what I'm seeing about how some of the serial plaintiffs seem to be targeting sites that are using those, I would take it off and keep working at fixing the issues. But I don't think that that's a lot of those little tools that the overlay is providing are things that people who need already have on their machine. And a lot of times, like things like increasing font size or changing the color stuff, often the person already has a tool and that tool is configured for their specific use case. And then the overlay hijacks stuff and makes neither tool work. And so a lot of times you think you're helping, but I can't tell you how many blind people have told me that they try to block the IP address of all these services so that they don't have to deal with it and they can continue to use the tools that they need to use. So I think I would take it off, but everybody needs to evaluate that.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Hey, I wanted to mention something. I put in accessicart.com link to the contact form because you mentioned this is, by the way, second webinar best done to just share experience back with fellow agency owners. But also she's an expert. She knows what she's doing. Her team knows what she's doing. So be sure. And she graciously comes on to share her expertise and experience. So if you need her, ping the contact form. I know Beth's got several services, does a lot of consulting in our space. She knows what she's doing. If you want to talk more, please engage Beth. She's so gracious to come on and share all this. Two things really. One, to say thanks. And then second is, if you have a need, go to accessicart.com and put the wrong thing in there. I was going to put the link back here to her site. So anything, what are you excited about doing in 2025? You mentioned leaning into more thought leadership content, which I love, but anything you're excited about in 2025? What you're doing?
Well, we're just all kind of waiting to see, certainly the anxiety around the European Accessibility Act kind of pieces is starting to ramp up, and kind of like GDPR, everyone has kind of put it off until the end, and so we're all just trying to start getting geared up as folks are coming with their urgent. Yeah, they've put it off, and now it's an urgent kind of thing. So, yeah, trying to kind of keep my head above water on all that for sure.
I bet. Well, thanks for doing it, and thanks for coming on here and sharing so generously. Um, accessicard.com, go check out Bet's work. This is your second webinar for us. I know we're always trying to see when she's available, but we so much appreciate you, Bet, for coming on and sharing this excellent
Thanks.
action steps for any agency owner.
Awesome. Glad to be here. Thanks, everybody.